us his great story. Please give a warm welcome, help me with a warm welcome for Gary Brauchla.
Thank you, Joanne. As she said, my name is Gary Brauchla, and I've always had in the back of my mind that I'd like to run a 5K, but I never did. I always figured I was too fat or too old or too slow. But it actually took my death for me to actually run one. Back on September 29th, 2012, around 3 o'clock in the morning, I died. So my talk today is basically going to be about the journey that I had between the time that I had my cardiac arrest and died and when I actually ran my first 5K. Tucson Medical Center thought my story was kind of unique, and so they went ahead and put together a commercial that kind of chronicalizes what happened. And so what I'd like to do right now is show you that commercial. At about 3 o'clock in the morning, my wife heard my last gasp, and I was laying there basically dead, gone into cardiac arrest. And so she immediately started doing CPR on me, called the paramedics, they flew me to TMC. Everything they did was right. They cooled my body, they provided all the necessary treatment that I had, and here I am now. I was there 8 months ago. I'm basically dead. Look at me now, I just ran a 5K. I was given the gift of life from here at TMC. So as you can see, saw in the commercial, I did run my 5K, but the real story is not having a cardiac arrest or running a 5K. The real story is the type and the amount of treatment that I received to keep me alive, and I kind of like to refer to it as my chain of care. Nobody that worked on me or took care of me allowed one of the links of my chain of care to break, and so hence here I am alive. I've got a couple of statistics that I'd like to share. In the United States, the death toll from a cardiac arrest is equivalent of 3 Boeing 777s crashing every day. You know, it's a staggering number. I mean, if you can think about it, about 300 people per plane, and that's the number that would crash every day, 3 of them. Can you imagine the outcry that would happen if that was indeed happening? But it doesn't, because it's a very individual thing that happens to people, and so you never really hear that much about it. According to the Sudden Cardiac Arrest Foundation in the United States, there's approximately 383,000 people go into cardiac arrest every year out of the hospital situation, very much similar to what happened to me. And only 8% of those nationwide survive. Pretty dismal figures. I would imagine it would be very easy to, as I like to say, give up. But none of you do, because you're all professionals. Well, 8% doesn't really mean much to me. What means a lot is, out of that 8% actually means 30,639 people survive out of 383,000. Well, in 2012, if my chain of care wouldn't have been kept intact, there would have only been 30,638 survivors. I wouldn't have survived. So that's thanks to you people, I did survive. You know, cardiac arrest is not very selective. You could be a white, black, Asian, Hispanic. You could be a 14-year-old kid marching in a band on the football field and drop in cardiac arrest. Or you could be a 43-year-old soccer mom at the mall, walking down and doing shopping and drop it with cardiac arrest. Or in my case, you could be a 68-year-old man sound asleep in your bed. So this is what I like to refer to as my chain of care. You go all the way through, and all those pieces have to stay complete in order for somebody like myself to survive. My story actually started on September 28th, 2012, which was the day before I had my cardiac arrest. As I would typically do 3 or 4 times a week, I got up around 7 o'clock in the morning, went out and ran 1.7 miles. So I was in pretty good shape. Wasn't great shape, but in pretty good shape. You know, the Veterans Administration told me that I have a less than 10% chance of having a heart attack in the next 10 years. And that was only like 2 months before I had my cardiac arrest. So it shouldn't have happened. Also, fortunately for me, my wife wasn't like 70% of the people in the United States who, exposed to a cardiac experience like that, wouldn't know what to do because they don't know CPR. Just so happened that my wife was Kathy, who's sitting right here in the front in the blue. She was a surgical technician in Kansas City, Missouri for 15 years. And she knew exactly what to do. She had lots of training, lots of practice and stuff like that. And by the way, that's Kathy on the left. She's a pretty one. So anyway, so also on the day before, like, you know, along with running, Kathy was in Phoenix and she was helping our daughter-in-law give birth to twin baby girls, Audrey and Monroe. So that night she came home about 10 or 10:30. We lived down in Sunsides. She came down about 10 or 10:30. We talked a little bit about the babies and what have you, and finally got to bed about midnight. Felt great, happy for the babies. And so around 2:30 or 2 o'clock, somewhere in there somewhere, she heard me in the bathroom, had the light on. She came in and asked me what was wrong, and I said, I had a real pain in my right shoulder. So then I just taken a lead tablet, so took that, didn't think much about it, you know, played a lot of football and stuff. And also I was belching a lot, had a lot of indigestion it seemed like, and she asked me, what did I have for dinner? And I told her I had a can of Hormel chili with beans. So we kind of thought, well, oh well. And so we went back to bed. She kind of made up, flipped up the pillow so I could kind of lean up so I wasn't laying down. And went back to sleep, and about 15 minutes later, or whatever it was, she heard me snore. Woke her up. Probably wasn't a snore, it probably was my last gasp. She reached over and nudged me to get me to roll over, I didn't move. She reached over again and nudged me, didn't move. And she's thinking to herself, why are you messing with me at this time in the morning when I haven't had any sleep in the last 48 hours? So she gave me a little bit harder shove. I still didn't move. So she, all of a sudden it clicked in her mind, she thought, something's not right. Why isn't he moving? So she immediately jumped out of bed, ran over, turned on the light, looked over at me, and there I was laying there dead. I guess my tongue was hanging out, I don't know. She immediately came over to my side of the bed, started shaking me, wake up, wake up, wake up, and nothing happened. And she knew I was in trouble. So she knew at that time that she needed to start CPR on me. She also knew that as everybody did, she had to get me on a hard surface. I was laying on the bed. But she also knew that she weighs 120 pounds and I weigh 200 pounds. She tried to slide me off the end of the bed, gonna probably, even though I was unconscious, not more unconscious, or hurt me in some way. But then also, if she tried to roll me off the side of the bed, we have a nightstand, had a dresser about this far away, and she's afraid to get in a position that could get me to CPR. So she did the only thing that she could, and she started doing CPR on me right on the bed. She was standing up, I was laying there, she started doing compressions. We had talked about before that compressions only is primarily the best way to do for a cardiac patient. So that's what she was doing. Called 911. She can't really remember talking to him, told him I was non-responsive and I was probably having a heart attack. And so as she was waiting for the ambulance to come, kept doing compressions. She got so tired that she thought to herself, I can't do this anymore. And so rather than quit, rather than give up, she actually climbed on top of me on the bed and was straddling me over top of me and was still doing the CPRs as she heard the greatest noise in all the world, and that was the rumbling of the diesel engine of the ambulance as it pulled up out front. So at that point, in comes the Sunsides Pierce Fire Department. They immediately took over, they put me on a backboard, slid me onto the floor, and started assessing the situation. And one of the things that I'm really fortunate at, because I'm the guy in charge, is that the members of the Sunset Pierce Fire Department are here right now. So at that, I'd like them to stand up if they would. Thank you, guys. That's Levi and Chris. You're my heroes. You saved my life.
You're a hero.
So anyway, so they immediately determined that I was in B-fib. They got me ready. They did the compressions that they had to do. They got me, prepared for treatment, and they defibrillated me. First time was a charm. My heart came back into rhythm, and because I was unconscious and not breathing very well, they went ahead and decided that they would life flight me to Tucson, called the life flight. Well, they called the life flight. LifeNet came and got in to get me. They transported me down to the Sunsites Pierce helipad, which I don't know if many of you know where Sunsites is, but it's about 90 miles southeast of Tucson, down toward Douglas, kind of a real remote area, and I like to refer to it as right at the edge of the earth. So remote. And anyway, Sunsites Pierce, just a little community, we have a helipad. A few years ago, the citizens of Sunsites went together and donated money, and we actually built a helipad. We used to land helicopters in the front lawn of the golf course. Now we actually have a helipad. And I believe that Becky with LifeNet is here right now. And if she is, I guess not, maybe. Anyway, LifeNet, they intubated me, got me ready to transport, and took me to the Tucson Medical Center emergency room, where I was immediately received. As Dr. Marshall just said, the standard protocol was to immediately get me into the cath lab as soon as possible to try to see what was wrong. And fortunately for me, Dr. Marius Wagner from Pima Heart was the cardiologist on call. He went in and he determined that I indeed had 3 blocked arteries feeding my heart, 200%, 190%. And so immediately inserted 3 stents, 2 in the artery, one in the other artery, and the artery that was 90%. He left that for a later date, if there would be one. After he got done with the procedure, he came out and he talked to Kathy. He told her I was very fortunate in that I had actually gone into cardiogenetic shock, meaning one of the muscles of my heart, blood starved, blood-rich oxygen was starved. And he said that normally that's a death spiral that you don't normally survive from. But he said either Kathy or Levi or Chris, back from Sunset Pierce, when they were doing the CPR, me evidently broke the clot loose and allowed the blood to flow into my heart, muscle to keep me alive. From the cath lab, I went directly to the ICU, cardiac ICU, I was just told. And the protocol then was to put me into therapeutic hypothermia. My body was lowered down to about 90, 92 degrees. I was kept there for 24 hours. And normally after they warm you back up, the standard procedure, at least the standard procedure back when it first really became prevalent back in 2005, 2006 was that if you don't wake up within 48 hours, there's some serious determination as to whether to make a call. Well, about 48 hours after I was warmed up, I was still asleep. The neurologist was looking into my eyes, and he finally said to Kathy, he said, I think he's still in there. And so about 72 hours later, I actually woke up. Pretty goofy. Took me to post-critical care. Stayed there. And my total stay in the hospital was about 2.5 weeks of joy. So anyway, after 2.5 weeks, I walked out of the hospital. I was one of the 8% of survivors. I was one of the lucky ones. Everybody in my chain of care had done exactly what they were supposed to do. None of them gave up on me. They did exactly what they were trained. And so none of the legs got broken, and so I survived. Shortly after I got out, about a week, there was some kind of a function going on in Sunside. And as it turned out, Kathy and I decided to go up there because I was pretty weak, wanted to get a little bit of exercise. And we're walking up there, the Sunside's Pierce Fire Department had their ambulance and fire engine there, and they were giving away pens and keychains and stuff. And so I walked up, and she said, those two guys over there happen to be the two that were actually doing the CPR in. Well, it just so happens that Chris and Levi that were just standing up there, they were the two that were there. And I walked up to him and I said to Levi, and Chris both of them, but I said to Levi, do you know who I am? And he looked at me and said, no, sir, I don't believe I do. So we talked a little bit longer and kept giving him hints. And finally, he kind of started getting a little bit of a grin on his face. His eyes started getting a little bit big. He looked at me and said, oh my God, I thought you died. Oh my God, I thought you died. You know, he didn't give up on me. He thought I was a dead man, but he never gave up. Kathy could have very easily given up. She could have said, oh, I can't get you onto the floor, onto a hard surface, so I can't do CPR because they say you got to be on a hard surface. She could have given up when she got so extremely tired that she couldn't do it anymore. She had to climb on top of the bed, but she didn't give up. Life in that helicopter did everything they could to get me to Tucson Medical Center so that I could survive. They didn't give up on me. The emergency room personnel, they received me, they took me in, they did exactly what they had to do. They knew that statistically I was going to die, but they never once let me go to that point. They always kept me alive. Just a little too soon. The cath lab, Dr. Wagner, even though he knew that what was wrong with me, the cardiogenic shock, I didn't have hardly any chance of surviving. But he didn't give up. He did everything he could to ensure that I survived to go to the ICU, the next length of my chain. And the people in ICU, Kathy said that she went back there a number of times, and the room was absolutely jammed with people and equipment. You couldn't hardly get in. There were so many people working on me to ensure that I survived, even though the chances of me surviving are so slim, 8% or lower. Nobody gave up on it. So after back in November, I had my cardiac arrest in September. In November, Dr. Wagner wrote me a prescription to go to cardio rehab. And always, like I say, I'm always kind of athletic. I like to work out and stuff like that. So I started going, and I had to drive to the old El Dorado Hospital, which is right over here off the Speedway in Wilmot. I had to drive there 3 times a week. I drove 90 miles each way, 3 times a week for 12 weeks. They took care of me. They strengthened my body. You know, they hooked me up to monitors to make sure everything was safe. They gave me classes on nutrition and why I was there and everything else. And so I kept going. I kept getting stronger and stronger. And finally, at Thanksgiving time, I got one of the greatest gifts in all the world. I got to hold my 2 little babies that were born the day before I died, Audrey and Monroe. And also at Christmas time, I got to spend time with my family. And we had a great holiday. Rather than having a mourning or a wake, we had a celebration. So after the holidays, one day I was talking to Mark Gaxiola, who was the director of the cardiac rehab facility. And I said, Mark, you know, I've always had in the back of my mind that I wanted to run a 5K. I said, but I never did because I always considered it too fat, or too old, or too slow. And he looked at me and said, Gary, he says, why don't you run one? I said, well, I don't know how. I don't know how to train for it. He goes, I'll teach you. I'll show you what you have to do. And so because of people just like you that didn't give up on me, people that knew exactly what they needed to do to keep a person alive, even though the chances of dying were very great. Because of all you people on June 1st, 2013, at 68 years old, I ran my first 5K. You know, I didn't win. There was 2,300 of us ran that day. And I think I came around 1,200. But because professionals just like you didn't let that chain of care get broken, because they kept me alive, they did exactly, beat the odds, against all odds that I was going to survive. I think I really won that race that day. So, with that, I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today. You know, one thing I might say is that the pictures that they got of me racing was actually my second race. That was October. That one was my first race in June. And because of people like you and saving me, next Saturday, a week from tomorrow, I run the second anniversary of this race. I'm going to run 3 more races this summer, or this year. So with that, I'd like to thank you. Doing everything that you do and being there for me. Thank you.